Hello everyone and welcome back to another marvelous video. Vampires have held a certain fascination among people, especially in pop culture, for decades now. There have been multiple films and TV shows that have made use of this terrifying creature. One such film is Nosferatu by Robert Eggers. The film is an unauthorized adaptation of the original Dracula by Bram Stoker, and it's a remake of a 1922 German film of the same title. It has an ensemble cast that includes Bill Skarsgård, Lily Rose Depp, Emma Corrin, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Nicholas Hoult, Willem Dafoe, Ralph Ineson, and Simon McBurney. The film just released on Christmas Day and it's been receiving overwhelming praise from both critics and audiences. So sit back and enjoy as we dive into this video.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means an awful lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Who is Count Orlok? Why is he called Nosferatu? Let's plunge into who this character truly is and why he's called Nosferatu. Orlok is the Count of Carpathian in Transylvania, a figure who's both dreaded and scandalous. He's otherwise known as the Bird of Death. The name Nosferatu is often attached to him since it's essentially another way to say vampire. The word comes from Romanian and is a literal interpretation of Nesuferet, which generally means the insufferable or the offensive one. However, get this, Nosferatu is not truly his name, it's the name of his species. Orlok lives alone in a dreadful palace, getting by feeding on blood. Before he turned into this frightening creature, he was a black magician. However, Belial, Satan's lieutenant, changed him. Throughout the course of centuries, he's spread plagues through towns, leaving a trail of death along his way and transforming others into beasts as well. He's the antagonist of the 1922 silent movie Nosferatu. What does Count Orlok look like? In this German film, the character is everything but your regular vampire. He's tall, bald, and has these frighteningly pointed ears. His irises are completely white, and his thick eyebrows simply add to the disturbing energy. Unlike the suave and appealing vampires we're accustomed to seeing on screen, his gaze is straight up unnerving. It's not only his face. His nails are not simply sharp, they're more pointy like claws and very lengthy, and his hands are huge. Truly, he doesn't match the typical vampire picture by any means. The canonical sharp canines the vampires have are not what he has. His teeth are sharp everywhere, and he has long razor-like teeth that stick out the front of his mouth. He's someone with no human characteristics. He's completely different from Dracula, who can blend in with individuals, walk around in sunlight unharmed, and even seem charming at times. Orlok is the direct opposite of this. He can't conceal what he is, and that makes him significantly more frightening. Now that we've discussed what Nosferatu looked like back in 1922, let's move on to his appearance in the latest film. Robert Eggers, the director, has made sure that it's a look that we've never seen before in a Dracula film. His Orlok has the looks of a folk vampire. Basically, this version looks more like a corpse than a traditional vampire. Eggers has also gone all out by giving him real Transylvanian historical clothes. The appearance of Orlok in this film is done slowly, which means he doesn't look dead right away from the beginning. Where does Count Orlok stay? Orlok lives in a decaying castle in the corner of the Carpathian Mountains, a place far away. Thomas Hutter, the man who goes to help him buy a house, mentions that it's a place with blood-red mountains and has bandits and ghosts. Orlok's castle can be seen clearly from the mountain trails. However, it seems as though nobody can access the place. Only Orlok's coach is able to travel through the white forest that separates the rest of Transylvania from this castle. It's also a place that people simply refuse to enter. Thomas Hutter's own driver refuses to take him up in his carriage and calls it the Land of the Phantoms. Orlok sends his own carriage to get Hutter to his castle. It must truly be a place with terrifying stories surrounding it if people completely refuse to go there. After Orlok sets his eyes on Hutter's wife, Ellen, he leaves his castle to go to Wisborg. He does this by hiding himself in one of his coffins filled with soil. These coffins are then loaded onto a ship that goes to Wisborg. The house that Orlok purchased is the one across from Hutter's. He goes there so he can basically stalk and drink Ellen's blood. It's also where he meets his demise. He never goes back to his castle in the mountains after he leaves. What is Count Orlok's connection with Count Dracula? Because this adaptation was unauthorized, various names and details from the novel were changed so it would be different from Bram Stoker's Dracula. So Count Dracula became Count Orlok in this German expressionist movie. There are many similarities between these two characters. Without Dracula, the character of Nosferatu would not exist. The plot lines are also quite similar. However, there are some differences between the two. Count Dracula is a character portrayed in a very charming and regal way. Count Orlok doesn't share this. His appearance is more rat-like, given the fact that Belial created him. Orlok basically becomes the embodiment of the more deceased and demonic side of vampire lore. His character is more faithful to vampire lore than Dracula is. Another key difference between the two is that when Orlok bites his victims, they end up dead instead of turning. He basically goes on an endless massacre and is blamed by all the locals. The film faced a lot of trouble when it came out because of these similarities. Heirs of Bram Stoker were against this unauthorized adaptation. The name was changed so they wouldn't have any copyright strikes, but that just wasn't the case. The film also openly mentioned Stoker's novel as a source of inspiration, so Stoker's heirs sued, and the verdict was that all copies of Nosferatu were to be destroyed. However, many copies survived and found their way to different countries. In countries like Sweden, the film was banned for around 50 years. However, this ban also had to do with how scary the film was, as it seems like it was too much for Nordic audiences back then. The template look for Dracula became popular and not as unsettling as time went on. Orlok, however, still remains creepy and distinctive. How does Count Orlok spread his plague-like curse? After Thomas Hutter confirms that Orlok is a vampire, he sees him loading up a cart with multiple coffins filled with soil. He hides in one of these, flees from his castle, and travels by sea to Wisborg. The soil in these coffins is supposedly the unhallowed earth from his own grave. From the Book of Vampires, we learn that he must sleep in this soil to sustain his power. The soil is from the fields of the Black Death. When he boards the ship leading to Wisborg, he kills all the crew members. They all get sick and die. The only ones left are the captain and his first mate. However, the first mate also ends up dead when he opens a coffin from which rats emerge. Orlok rises from this coffin and scares him. The ship arrives at the port of Wisborg with a crew that's already dead. Orlok is essentially spreading the bubonic plague, and we see this happening with all the rats running ashore. This has parallels to real-world history. Back in 16th century Venice, gravediggers made a connection between the Black Death and vampires due to their lack of medical knowledge about the plague. Many people in town became victims of the plague. The local authorities are forced to declare a quarantine, which provokes mass hysteria among the people. More than Nosferatu's arrival, it's the ship full of plague-ridden coffins, the rats, and the Black Death that induce more fear in the people because of the historical trauma they evoke. This specific scene has produced many famous images from the movie. The plague itself generates fear, reaching back into medieval Europe and evoking the horrors of the Black Death with its chilling imagery. Does Count Orlok use any special abilities? As we've already discussed, Count Orlok is a vampire. This means he is a superhuman and immortal being that must drink blood to survive. He also has some sort of telekinetic powers, as he can open doors and gates without touching them, and can also levitate his own body. One of his powers is the ability to spread the plague to kill people. Another is his ability to disappear from sight. He is also capable of altering his appearance to suit his needs. For instance, when he picks up Thomas Hutter in a black coach, he's dressed in black, embodying a mysterious figure. Orlok can kill people by drawing their blood rather than turning them into vampires. Since Orlok is inspired by Count Dracula, it seems fair to assume that he shares some of Dracula's powers. For example, Bram Stoker says Dracula has the strength of around 20 men, so Orlok is likely very similar. Orlok can also shapeshift into a wolf to prey on people. Most peasants refer to him as a werewolf more often than a vampire. He has the ability to phase through walls, demonstrated when he enters the house he purchased in Wisborg, the one across from the Hutters. Another notable power is his telepathy. For instance, Orlok senses the death of his servant Nock, who was stoned by a hysterical mob. Orlok is also capable of hypnotizing people, likely how he enchanted Nock. What is the significance of Count Orlok's body posture? Count Orlok's appearance is truly unsettling, and much of this comes from his oversized overcoat and unnaturally wide shoulders. He frequently moves with a hunched posture, giving him a gaunt and ghostly silhouette. The way he sits or walks further dehumanizes him. His posture reinforces the idea that he is other, something alien and inherently terrifying. Unlike Count Dracula, who can blend into society and even appear charming, Count Orlok stands out completely. His posture alone makes him an object of dread. What does Count Orlok eat? Like all vampires, Count Orlok survives by drinking blood, probably exclusively human blood. Orlok can't really control himself when there's blood around. When Thomas Hutter cuts his thumb accidentally while slicing his bread at a dinner with Orlok, he's immediately tempted to drink it. It seems as though his victims aren't really aware when he's feeding on them. When he feeds on Hutter, Hutter has already collapsed in a chair. We don't really see how Orlok goes about draining his blood, we only see Hutter discovering 2 bites on his neck the next morning. Even after this, he doesn't associate it with vampires, he just assumes that it must be a mosquito bite. Even though Orlok might eat normal food along with his guests, it's of no use to him. He sustains himself only with blood. What are Count Orlok's weaknesses? When we think of vampires and their weaknesses, what comes to mind immediately? Well, if you ask me, I would say holy water, crosses, maybe a stake to the heart, definitely garlic, and of course, who can forget sunlight? The trope of sunlight affecting vampires has been cemented into our minds so deeply, especially after the sparkly vampires from Twilight. Honestly, I don't think I'll ever get the image of a sparkly Robert Pattinson standing shirtless in the sun out of my head, but this movie's a nice start. The trope of vampires dying in the sun is very well worn at this point, and it's something that affects Count Orlok as well. Count Dracula was someone who would get weak when exposed to the sun, but that's not the case here with Count Orlok. A whole scene is dedicated to his weakness and how exactly one can take him down. When Ellen Hutter reads the Book of the Vampires, she knows exactly what to do to take down Count Orlok. When she sees her village being taken over by the Black Plague, she decides that she needs to do something. When she reads the book, she realizes that there's a better way to defeat him than a stake through the heart. The book gives her the information that if a woman who is pure of heart willingly offers him her blood long enough to keep him from seeking shelter from the sunlight, he'll be vanquished. Now, I don't know if the part about a pure woman offering her blood has anything to do with defeating him. Maybe just sunlight is enough. This seems like another one of those tropes where everything depends on a woman with a pure heart giving up her life, but this is how she defeats him. She lures Orlok into a room and then lies down on her bed while he drinks her blood from her neck. She keeps him there till the sun rises, and when it does, he's immediately burned away. It seems like he's very absent-minded when he ends up drinking blood, but Ellen soon also dies in the arms of her husband. Another thing that could weaken him is probably removing his Transylvanian soil. It seems like he needs to sleep in that soil every night to sustain his powers, so if you don't have a pure-hearted woman and sunlight around, cutting off his access to it is probably the way to go. I still feel like the woman's purity should have nothing to do with his defeat. Maybe the pure-hearted aspect is what would lure him in. What inspired Count Orlok's design? An important aspect of the creation of the looks in Nosferatu is Albin Grau. He was an active member of the occult, and he was the art director for this film. He co-founded a production company to make films about the supernatural and the occult, and this had an influence on his designs. You can see the surrealist look of German expressionism from the concept art that he made for the film. This is basically the style of the film, and it created an ideal setting for his version of Orlok. In this art, you can see Orlok as a dark and lanky creature. He's also dark and bony, and he basically fades into the background. A lot of silent films in Germany are labeled as expressionist, even if the movies themselves are not. Nosferatu is not very expressionist, but Grau's art goes in that direction. Orlok has a very rat-like figure. His appearance and his similarity to rats have symbolic ties to the Black Death, which he spreads across villages. How did the design of Count Orlok shape modern horror? Count Orlok is a very important character in the vampire genre's history. He's inspired many characters since his inception. One character that is a remake of his is from the 1979 film by Werner Herzog. His film, Nosferatu the Vampire, keeps the look of Count Orlok, but Herzog names his vampire Count Dracula. There are many similarities between this character and Orlok. There are many other characters that are inspired by Count Orlok's looks and design. The character of Kurt Barlow from the miniseries Salem's Lot by Tobe Hooper, which is based on a Stephen King novel, also looks a lot like Orlok. Barlow has a bald head, pointy ears, long fingernails, and fangs. He almost looks like a miniature version of Orlok. His character in the books, however, looks just like a normal human. Hooper is the one who made him look like Orlok in this adaptation. Count Orlok's design has become something of an archetype for vampires. Take the Reapers from Blade 2, the Masters from Jacob's Wife, or even Peter from What We Do in the Shadows. All of them are taken from this mold. Even the idea that vampires can die because of sunlight comes from here. So Orlok's legacy is something that has continued, even in pop culture, to this day. Vampires are not the only creatures that Count Orlok has inspired either. There are many other villains from the horror genre that have taken traits from his character. Take Lamia from Drag Me to Hell by Sam Raimi, for example. In one scene, Lamia is torturing Christine in her house. She locks herself in a room to get away, but that doesn't work. The creature walks up to the door, and when it stands in front of it, its feet cast a shadow into the room. The shadow basically extends and tries to grab Christine. Now, that sounds a lot like a famous scene from Nosferatu. Here, Orlok is on his way to bite one of his victims, and he is seen walking up the stairs. You can't really see him, you can only see his shadow here. When he reaches the victim's door, you still can't see him, even though you should be able to at this point from that angle. Basically, his shadow is him, and this is the same with Lamia. A few other characters that have been inspired by him are the Babadook and Freddy Krueger. And with that, you guys, we've come to the end of yet another marvelous video. The monstrous anatomy of Count Orlok solidifies his status as one of the most memorable and unsettling vampires in cinematic history. Wouldn't you agree? How do you think Count Orlok has been portrayed in the latest remake? Do you think it was close to the original? Let us know your thoughts on one of history's most famous vampires in the comment section down below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and stay marvelous.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.